Hey, welcome back. Today I want to talk to you a little bit about the proper way to hold your instrument if you're going to play while seated. I have a separate video series. If you are interested in holding the bass standing up, you can click over to that and check that one out. If you're a little on the fence about either one, then you may want to watch both and see what you think may work for you. There are certain advantages that come with playing seated and certain advantages that come with playing standing up. It's very much a 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Do which one makes you the most comfortable. So getting right to it, there will be several parts to this video series. This is part 1, which is going to be about just the basic setup and holding of the instrument. I'm going to start just talking about the stool itself. So let me set down my bass here for a moment. First thing you're going to need to get is a stool that is the right size for you, and this is very important. If you're tall enough for a standard height bar stool, then that's really all you need. That's what I use. That's what most of the professionals I know use, is just a standard height bar stool like you can get at Walmart or Target or any number of other places. If you're not quite tall enough for a standard height bar stool, then you're going to have to get one that is the right size for you. Again, Target and Walmart sell them at a few different heights, and there are some adjustable height options that you can research. Some people really like those. Some people don't care for them as much. So you can look around, see what other people use, try out different things, see what works for you. Wooden bar stool works pretty well for most people. This is what you need to consider when you're picking out your stool. When you sit, your right leg must be able to comfortably sit flat on the floor when you sit on the front edge of the bar stool. So you'll notice that I'm sitting on the front edge of my stool. I am not sitting back on the stool, because even at my size, I'm 6'2". If I sit on the back of the stool, my feet don't reach the floor, and I've got this bit of stool right here that the instrument is going to run into and hit and cause problems. So you just sit on the front edge of the stool. Can your feet comfortably reach the floor, particularly your right foot, with a little bit of room to bend your knee? It doesn't have to be this bend. Let's say you can reach like that. That's fine. Got to be able to reach the floor though. You need to have a rung to rest your foot on, because when you hold your bass, your left leg is going to come up like this. There needs to be a rung high enough so that the top of your thigh is basically parallel to the floor. If I try to hold my bass with my leg down here, it doesn't work. The thing is wobbly, it's uncomfortable, I don't have good control over it. I've got to have my leg up on, with my foot hooked on the second rung of the stool. So whatever you use, you're going to need to have a rung that you can get your leg high enough on so that the top of your thigh basically parallel to the floor. Something else very important. Here's one of the main disadvantages of playing while seated. Wherever you go to play your bass goes with you, your stool goes with you. Don't play standing in one place and seated in another, because you don't want to carry a stool around. Set up the same way every time. Your stool goes with you wherever you go. If you have two different setups, let's say you're playing in your school orchestra and you have a setup at school and you have a setup at home, and you got an instrument maybe in both places, if you're lucky enough to have that, you need to have a stool in both places. The stool has to be exactly the same size. You must have a properly sized stool wherever you go. Most of the time that means you got to carry this sucker around with you wherever you're going. So bear that in mind. It can turn into a disadvantage of playing with a stool, having the extra stuff to carry, or if you're playing in two places, making sure you have the same thing in both places. For your end pin, I highly recommend using a strap like the one I have here. I use the end pin anchor by the company Xeros, Xeros. I think there's some tremendous advantages to using the strap rather than using a regular hockey puck style end pin. Once you set the length of it, you hook it around the end of your stool. It's the same every single time. Huge advantage to being able to set up the same way every single time. So I highly recommend using the end pin anchor if you're going to play while seated. Okay, moving on. Getting the bass set up. Now, you'll notice that I have my stool so that one of the legs is pointing forward. I'm not sitting on it like this. with one of the legs pointed directly forward. I'm going to come over here, my right leg, foot flat on the floor, my left leg up on the second rung. I'm going to put my end pin into the end pin anchor. I'm going to hold the base up in front of me. Good rule of thumb is distance to start out is you want the base straight up and down when your arm is straight out in front of you. Lean it back into my body. I'm holding my base. A couple of things to consider when you're setting up the base. First thing, we'll talk about end pin height. This will be a little bit different for different people, depends on your size. Here are the things to consider. First one, when I set up, I like for my nut to be basically level with my eye. I think that's a very good starting point. It works well for a lot of people. It won't work well for everybody, but that's where I like to start. Nut level with my eye. Once you've got that set up, you got to take your bow. French or German, doesn't matter. This will be the same. Relax your arm and see where it hits the string. You've got to be aiming to be able to at least, when your arm is relaxed and your shoulders are square, you don't want to have to dip a shoulder. Shoulders are square, arm is relaxed, to reach this spot that's halfway in between the bridge and the fingerboard. Some teachers call this lane 3, lane 1, 2, 3. I like to call it the bow line, which is the imaginary line that links these two top circles of your F-hole, this imaginary line exactly between the bridge and the fingerboard. You've got to be able to comfortably reach that. If your arm is relaxed and you're only reaching to here, you've got to raise the base end pin up a little bit. The compromise you run into is half position. With nut level equal to the eye, I find half position very comfortable. As the base starts to raise up, half position starts to be back behind your head, and you can get a little bit of strain in your shoulder from having to reach back here to play in half position. So you may have to find that happy medium where you can reach the bow line, but you don't have to reach too far behind your head to play in half position. But you want to avoid having to dip your shoulder to be able to reach the bow line or lane 3, whichever you're used to calling it. Things you can do to make this adjustment, things you can play around with. One is, of course, the length of your end pin. The other is the angle of the base. Like I said, to start, you want to start off basically with your arm extended, hand right here on top of the whatever this is called. I don't know what the name of that is. But if you put it right here, the base is basically standing straight up and down. Lean it back. That's a good starting point. Sometimes people will like to bring it in a little bit, and that'll raise up this part of the instrument, make it so you can reach further down over here. Some people like to really have a pretty steep angle on it and bring it out here kind of more like that and play it at a steeper angle like this. Your mileage may vary. You have to experiment with that. Find out what's comfortable for you. But like I said, this a good starting point. When you're holding the bass, right knee is going to touch the instrument right here, right along the lower bout. My left leg, the back of the bass, is sitting flat against the inside of my thigh. If I turn sideways, let me turn sideways for just a moment. Maybe you can see it a little better. Hold the bass just like this, and you see the back of the instrument right up against the inside of my thigh. What that gives me, get set back here facing the camera, is an angle of the bass to my body of roughly 60 degrees. There are some people who like to hold the instrument more like this, with it facing a little more frontward like a cello. I find that this can work pretty well for people who are kind of big. I used to play kind of like this, and it works well enough. I can reach the G string pretty comfortably. I can get that bow line without having to dip my shoulder. I find that I don't like the way I have to flex my muscles to reach all the way over there, though. And people who have smaller builds, a lot of times this is it. They only get to here, and your tone is going to suffer. When you turn the instrument this way, it's so much easier to reach the G string. I find it more relaxed on my bow arm. You can experiment. Like I said, some people really prefer to play this way. I like to have the instrument a little more tilted. I find it easier to reach the G string. I can use my left leg. I can drop my knee. I can use my legs together to turn the instrument a little bit. Let's say I need to play the E string, and we'll talk more about this in the video on using the bow. I can drop my leg or turn the instrument a little bit, and then I'll turn it back when I get to the G string. And we'll talk about that, like I said, more in the video on bowing the bass. So anyway, there's the first installment, how to basically set up the instrument and just hold it securely in a seated position, which again is one of the advantages of playing while seated. When you're standing, you have to balance the thing and control its turning around. When you're seated, you put it here in your lap. You have very solid control of the instrument. So hopefully you found this helpful. Be on the lookout for episode 2 in this series, where we'll talk about using the bow while seated. And if you found this helpful, leave me a comment, like the video, and subscribe to my channel. Thank you.